desert bighorn. We usually think of wild sheep as creatures of high alpine mountains, but desert bighorn are unique, thriving in the harshest desert climates of North America. Ironically, these hardy and magnificent animals are extremely sensitive to the impacts of modern man. For more than a century, they've been a vanishing part of the American wilderness. But that's begun to change because people cared enough to get involved. This is the story of the desert bighorn and the efforts of volunteers, researchers, and wildlife agencies to return them to their historic range. Modern times have brought solutions as well as problems. Where the bighorn's decline has been halted or reversed, it's been done with 20th century techniques, using information from careful field study and the capture, medical examination, and relocation of wild sheep. Interaction between wild sheep and humans goes back to the appearance of sheep on this continent over 8,000 years ago. Of all the ceremonial designs etched onto rock by the Western Indians, the bighorn motif is among the most abundant. In an interglacial period, wild sheep arrived from Asia, traveling east across the Bering Strait land bridge. As the sheep spread out onto new grasslands left behind by melting glaciers, they diversified into various species, including the doll and the stone sheep of the far northwest, and the Rocky Mountain bighorn. Wild sheep once ranged as far as the Badlands of Nebraska and the Big Bend of Texas. In the southwest, the desert subspecies included the Nelson, or desert bighorn. The basic needs of desert bighorn are food, water, and escape terrain. They've learned to survive on sparse desert vegetation, creosote bush, saltgrass, brittle bush, and snakeweed. In California's Mojave Desert, rainfall averages less than 4 inches per year. Places where water flows and collects are few and precious. When they find a source, bighorns center their existence around it, sometimes passing their entire lives within 20 miles of the same water hole. During dry months, the desert sheep can endure 110-degree heat and go without drinking for up to 8 days. Sheep also need escape terrain, high places where they feel secure in their ability to spot approaching threats, and steep crags where they can use their legendary agility to advantage. Once they find a suitable home, bighorn develop an amazing loyalty to it. The sheep will stay and die rather than permit themselves to be pushed out. For centuries, the wanderings of young rams maintained contact between the separate sheep populations. In their second or third year, the rams traveled for miles to distant mountains, bringing new blood to isolated herds. Wild sheep existed largely undisturbed until the arrival of European civilization. It began with the Padres and early Spanish explorers, continued with the establishment of ranchos and haciendas. Then, following the lure of California gold, early prospectors and their burros pushed deep into bighorn country. By the late 1800s, mines were established in many locations, taking over scarce water supplies. Market hunters slaughtered wild game, including bighorn, to provide work camps with fresh meat. Herds of domestic sheep and cattle not only drove the bighorn back, but also introduced new diseases like sore mouth and scabies, devastating the wild sheep. In 1878, acting to halt the drastic decline of wildlife, the California legislature passed laws that gave protected status to the bighorn and outlawed market hunting. But the law did little to cope with other problems. Impacts of modern civilization accelerated, and the historic range of desert bighorn shrank to isolated areas. Today, the bighorns still face pressures that test their ability to cope and adapt. But something vital has changed. For the first time, humans are stepping in on the side of the bighorn. One problem people are now working to solve was created over 50 years ago: wild burros. When the automobile arrived, these old companions of the miners were turned out into the desert. With no natural enemies, burros multiplied rapidly. One burro can use 3 times the amount of food and water required by an adult bighorn. And in the fragile desert, food and water are scarce. Protected by federal legislation, burro herds continued to expand. Finally, matters came to a head in the Mojave Desert at the China Lake Naval Weapons Center.
There seems to be a direct correlation between the feral burro increase and the native bighorn sheep decline. As the feral burros started exploding in 1970 through 1980, the bighorn sheep declined from approximately 20 head on center to 0. And in that time, the burros went from approximately 400 to 4,000. In 1980, we first began to look at the burro problem. Our initial analysis was of the environmental problem. But before we had a chance to complete the studies, we had an emergency problem. We had burros wandering under the runways and wandering under the high-speed or paved roads, creating a real safety hazard. March of 1981, we directly reduced or shot 649, creating somewhat of a public outcry.
The Fund for Animals responded by filing a TRO, or temporary restraining order, in federal court in Fresno, California, to prevent the Navy at that time from shooting the burros. The TRO was granted in federal court. And then at a later date, through arbitration or negotiation that the Fund for Animals and myself did with the Navy, we came up with a solution. And the solution was to conduct a live removal program. We had about, on average, 6 to 10 cowboys, ordinarily 30 to 40 horses. And we would go out on the desert areas, spot the burros, and commence rounding them up, driving them sometimes as far as 10 miles.
Captured burros are being adopted by families throughout the United States, providing a cooperative solution to a serious problem.
It actually took 2 people, one being myself and then Dr. Tom McGill, the environmental branch of the Navy, to sit down at a table and discuss the matter and come up with a solution. And I think this is a fine example and a good illustration of what people can do if they put their minds to it.
One of my major goals when I accepted the job at the Naval Weapons Center was to see the complete removal of the feral burro. That is now almost a reality. By the summer of '84, when we reintroduced bighorn sheep, it should be a reality. It's just an incredible feeling as a professional biologist to been able to remove an exotic and an intruder into the environment and return the native animal, the bighorn sheep.
Some bighorn herds still maintain the ancient pattern of their lives, migrating from the snowy high country to winter in foothill areas where they bear their young. By reducing threats to these herds and encouraging their growth, more sheep are being raised for restoration to their original range. Although the effort has been hampered by legal restrictions and lack of funds, it is the active dream of people like wildlife biologist Dick Weaver to see the bighorn return.
In a personal way, sheep are dear to me. I guess I'm a desert person, and these are sheep of the desert, live in a harsh environment. You greatly admire their, not just for their beauty, majestic animal, that sort of thing, but their ability to cope with this harsh environment. And that's, I think, the thing that awes me the most about sheep. Bighorn sheep have declined over the past 100 years in certain areas and certain places. Some of the things that we're doing in a positive nature for bighorn and have turned the situation around is we're doing water development, we're improving the habitat, we're getting into a reintroduction program, and perhaps more important is we've been very involved in all sorts of planning. What needs to be protected, of course, is their habitat.
All wildlife, including bighorn sheep, are a product of the land. This simple fact makes protection of habitat vital and an ongoing source of controversy. In the resort community of Rancho Mirage, the conflict is between buildings for humans and habitat for desert sheep. The people are divided.
Definitely, I do have an opinion. I am in favor of the Murata project because it'll put between 200 and 300 men to work immediately just building the roads and bringing the utilities up there.
As long as the sheep have other areas to move into and all the ground isn't taken, why, it'll be no problem for the sheep to move someplace else.
I think there's a great conflict between developing in the hillside and protecting the sheep. I think the two are incompatible. I think there's enough room on the valley floor for a development to grow there. I think to place something like that on the hillside would definitely endanger the sheep.
I'm tired of the building we see around here. I think it's just a little bit too much. I don't think we need it all. And as far as the sheep goes, it's really unfortunate that the sheep have to suffer for the greed of man.
Rancho Mirage began as a vacation community for people drawn to the winter warmth of desert sunshine. As golf courses, resorts, and suburbs were established, real estate values soared, leading to the current building boom. Builders are now seeking hillside construction sites, even though traditional town policy was to leave these hills undeveloped. A $90 million resort, the Murata project, was proposed for construction next to a bighorn lambing area. The person responsible for adoption of the desert bighorn as town symbol was Lloyd Tevis, who was on the city council when Rancho Mirage first incorporated.
If you put developments in that habitat, obviously it's going to be the end of the sheep. I mean, there's no question about it. Once you remove the habitat, the sheep have no place to live. Now, the federated proposal is only the beginning of various proposals that are going to come forward for building in the mountain. And that is one of the reasons that I am so opposed to the federated proposal, because it will set a precedent.
I think if they can have both, I think they should definitely try for it. But I kind of question whether the sheep should remain at the price of jobs for working people today. I think that's very, very important for us today. And I think that sometimes the environmentalists have overkill the situation, and I think we have to think in terms of human resources, which is just as important today as the natural resources.
You know, I don't think there's an easy answer at all to this kind of thing. They've made an investment, they have an investment. On the other hand, I think that the people in the area would rather for the sheep to stay there. We're going to, as people, be everywhere all over this valley. Let's leave some of it open.
Although the project initially had strong support, opposition steadily mounted. Ultimately, the city council was forced to go to the people for a vote on whether the new development should be allowed. Despite the developers' media blitz, a majority voted to protect the mountains and the sheep. Rancho Mirage is not only the site of an ongoing land use conflict, it is also the scene of intensive hands-on work with a herd of peninsula bighorn. Private groups like the Desert Bighorn Research Institute are trying to ensure this group of wild sheep remains part of our future.
Well, the lambs have been dying of pneumonia. We know that the majority of them are dying from pneumonia. We want to determine what is causing that pneumonia. And we do know that there's 4 viruses in the range. We're trying to determine if it's one or a combination of them. And if, in fact, we do find out a specific cause, we hope to be able to vaccinate some of the animals in the range and be able to cause the lamb mortality to stop or dwindle.
The Institute work stands as a good example of problems and difficulties in doing sheep research. One very big reason why people were reluctant and have been all along to approve bighorn research, many aspects of hands-on research, stems from the fact that there is a philosophy that says everything is best left alone. I know that the Department of Fish, Game and other people are doing what they can for bighorn sheep, but in a way they have their hands tied trying to manage the species, I feel.
Restrictions on research stem from the current legal status of California's wild sheep, determined back in 1878. Called full protection, it places financial and legal limits on modern management techniques that could help bighorn herds. A significant issue in California today involves changing the bighorn's old protected status to a managed one, placing desert sheep under full management by the Department of Fish and Game.
The status of full protection have really, in my opinion, have been harmful to the sheep because of the image of complete hands-off by everybody and don't get near them, not even see them. You bother them. And we found that that isn't the way to manage animals. You've got to be with them, you've got to work closely with them, you've got to have hands-on work if we're going to bring these animals back to, as near we can, their original populations.
One aspect of game management that sometimes generates concern is that proper management may include hunting. Among those opposed to any hunting of sheep is Lloyd Tevis.
I have complete confidence in the Department of Fish and Game, and I would say unequivocally that it would not pose a threat to the survival of the population. But what you would do is you would make a population which today is very unwary and can be seen very easily by hikers, photographers, and the many, many people now that are going into the out of doors and great delight in seeing these animals. These animals will change their behavior under hunting, and this can be demonstrated, and become much more wary than they are today. And to me, that is the prime reason for not removing the present protected status.
It is an issue with many sides.
One has to understand that there are many different selfish motivations with respect to bighorn sheep or any species. There are those who want to hunt them and to shoot them and to perhaps kill a trophy ram. That's a selfish motivation. There are those who want to be able to see them and see them with a minimum of effort, and that's a selfish motivation. The overall proper concern has to be the health of the herd and the continuation of the species.
Ironically, removal of older, dominant rams and reintroduction of young rams may be a necessity if isolated herds are to survive. Scientist Karen Sausman, director of the Living Desert Reserve.
Well, the relevance to the inbreeding research we've been doing on wild sheep is simply that if wild sheep populations become more and more isolated, you may induce inbreeding by not having rams move from one band to another. Our research has shown that as soon as a male begins to breed back to his daughters or even back to his own dam, that we discover that the survival of those offspring drop from 80% down to 30%. Obviously, in order for the herd to survive, you want the greatest number of healthy lambs to survive. And therefore, we've got to manipulate the rams in a small population.
My personal goal and that of the departments, I hope, would be to return bighorn sheep in all the habitat available to them in California. That's going to take many years, but I think it can be accomplished, and it can be accomplished if we are able to really manage those sheep in a proper manner and not just sit back and look at them.
In some places, the return of the desert bighorn is already a reality. 15 years ago, sportsmen's groups took the lead, initiating studies and providing funds to improve water supplies. That work is now paying off. In California ranges like the Odad Peaks, desert sheep have become so numerous they are now exceeding the carrying capacity of the range. The excess population can be captured, transferred, and released back into ranges that bighorn once roamed. With limited resources, the Department of Fish and Game has already directed several relocations. It is a taste of what can be done. In Arizona and Nevada, more extensive programs are already underway. California's Whipple Mountains, the last wild sheep disappeared in the late 1940s. But with installation of a big game drinker, a site is being prepared to help reestablish desert sheep in a portion of their ancestral range. Today, as in the past, the willing cooperation of volunteers provides a tremendous resource.
Okay, well, what we're doing here is we're building a platform to put 3 1,700-gallon storage tanks on. What we do is build up a big foundation out of rocks, then bring in sand and gravel to fill in the holes. We keep it level, then we'll bring in the plastic tanks, get the pipeline coming down from the dam, which will fill these tanks up with water. Then we'll have another pipeline going to a drinker that's regulated with a float valve. That will be the item that the bighorn drink out of.
Back in the 1960s, sportsman Marvin Wood was one of the first to get involved.
We almost lost the antelope, and it wasn't until we got a game management program that we saved them. Now we got 3 times as many antelope. That's what prompted me to get in there and do something to save the bighorn. Well, I like to see them in the wild, and they are a majestic animal. I have a great love for them because they are so beautiful. It's fascinating here in the desert because it's a rather rugged terrain, and it's rather harsh, and it's a difficult situation for sheep to survive with the pressure of the mankind encroachment into the area. So they pushed out of a lot of the areas where they had water. We found we needed water, so we've been developing these projects now for about 15 years.
It's great to see the amount of interest and the amount of enthusiasm that some people have. These are not people that are sitting back and complaining. These are people that are out here working and doing something. We get a surprising variety of people on these projects. Everybody has a common interest, though, and they're interested in doing something for desert wildlife.
The bighorn sheep is a beautiful animal. We don't need him any more endangered than he is, and if they can reintroduce him to this area, I think it'd be great.
When you come back in this canyon, probably in a year, you're going to see a lot more wildlife than what you see this time. It's just a great feeling. It really is.
For the bighorn. And it benefits not only the bighorn, it benefits everyone that's out here. Get a lot of camaraderie, get to meet a lot of people. You're in the outdoors in an area where people don't usually get to come. And it's all for the good for the bighorn.
The best hope for Bighorn, the future of the Bighorn, rests with a very active management program, and you've seen just one phase of it here in this mountain range, our water development program. We, the human race, can turn things around for wildlife. We can actually make things better.
Modern man's manipulation of the world has greatly impacted the desert bighorn, but confronted with declining herds, dedicated people stepped in and showed us that the wild sheep can indeed return. The more each of us participates in wildlife issues, the more we'll understand about our place in nature. But you may ask, what can one person do? Well, much work remains to be done to help the desert bighorn. Volunteers to help install drinkers and transplant herds. Money for conservation groups, research, and protection of habitat. There's much to do. But first, you and I have a choice to make. Do we care enough to lend a hand?
If you would like to join the people helping the desert bighorn, write to the Artemis Wildlife Foundation, Box 1494, Santa Rosa, California, 95402.
Desert bighorn sheep, found only in the rugged arid mountains of the southwest United States and northern Mexico. The desert bighorn, like all North American wild sheep, were thought to have first arrived on this continent during the Pleistocene era, over 500,000 years ago. The wild sheep moving from Central Asia and Siberia most likely moved freely over a land bridge that once existed across the Bering Sea. Climatic conditions probably moved wild sheep southward through the Rocky Mountains, with some sheep moving as far south as northern Mexico. As glaciers receded, the wild sheep moved north, but they could no longer traverse the land bridge, and so they became permanent residents of North America. Today there are 4 varieties of wild sheep on this continent: the Dall, the Stone, the Rocky Mountain sheep, and the desert bighorn. Wild wild sheep have always captured man's imagination, as evidenced by early man's tribute to them in the form of pictographs. The stamina, strength, dignified stance, and the ability of wild sheep to exist in harsh environments have always been qualities admired by man. Brought together through their admiration and concern for the welfare of our wild sheep, the Foundation for North American Wild Sheep was formed. The foundation has undertaken and funded many programs which directly benefit wild sheep. With all forms of wildlife, the most critical element necessary for survival is habitat. Habitat is comprised of food, water, shelter, and space. All of these components must be arranged so that they're available for a given species. If any of these components are missing, the habitat becomes unsuitable. This is the dilemma in many areas of the Southwest, where the missing component is water. In the Little Horn Mountains of southwestern Arizona, significant rainfall is the exception rather than the rule. The water that man most often takes for granted is a precious and life-saving commodity for the wildlife who make their living out here. So in the Little Horn Mountains, the Arizona Game and Fish Department and the Bureau of Land Management unite with members of the Arizona Desert Bighorn Sheep Society and the Foundation for North American Wild Sheep to construct a water hole to benefit the desert bighorn. Sheep Society members are seasoned veterans in the area of waterhole development. Since their beginnings in 1968, the Arizona Desert Bighorn Sheep Society has existed for the welfare of Arizona's desert bighorns. They've been involved in over 100 waterhole projects. The significance of this project is explained by Arizona Game and Fish Department Development Supervisor Don Belknap.
This project, we hope, will make a transient sheep herd more resident. That's basically what we're trying to do, is expand the sheep range, the perennial range, as we could refer to it.
Upon arrival at the base camp, the labor begins. Equipment, supplies, and manpower are prepared for a helicopter ride to the construction site. But the same winter storms that will eventually make this project work are now a major obstacle. Safety comes first, so the helicopter airlifts for this day grind to a halt. But up on the mountain, preparations continue for the arrival of supplies and labor. Charter member of the Arizona Desert Bighorn Sheep Society and foundation member Dean Bowden explains the work to be done.
What we have here is a potential waterhole development site it's on the north side of the Little Horn Mountains, and it's one of the only areas on this mountain range where a site could be developed. And up here to my left is the solid rock watershed, and today, of course, it doesn't look to me like we ever need any water, but the good thing about this is we're going to build a dam right in this area right here that will catch water such as this rain that we have today. And the dam will eventually back up 25,000 gallons of water, which will last for up to 2 years without rain. Build it a little bit.
During the night, more members of the Foundation and Sheep Society have arrived. They discuss the upcoming day's work at a pre-dawn breakfast. Crew boss Bowden gives a few last-minute instructions as the volunteers gulp their last cup of coffee before they leave the warmth of the ironwood fire for the mountainside construction site.
And as soon as we get up there, we've got to haul a lot of rocks today. So we're going to break the people up into a couple of crews, but first and foremost is we're going to have to get a rock line going. So when we get up there, be sure and line out, and we'll show you where the rocks are at, and then we'll just run the rocks all the way up to it, and then we'll start mixing cement first thing.
Workers either walk to the site or were flown up by crack pilot Mel Kane and the turbine-powered helicopter of Foundation and Society member Dan Nasca. Work begins. Down at the base camp, supplies and equipment were loaded into helicopter slings and airlifted to the waterhole project site. As the supplies come in, they're organized so that they're out of the way until they're needed. Level ground is at a premium up here. As the dam site is prepared, the morning silence is broken by the gasoline-powered pine jar drill. The rebar framework for the retention dam is gradually woven. Other society and foundation members form a giant line, and in bucket brigade fashion, they toss the primary ingredients for the masonry retention dam up to the dam site.
Some of those are heavier than they look. Yeah.
Their labor may not seem as glamorous as the drilling and cement work, but there's a great deal of pride in getting the right size and kind of rock up to the construction site. The rock haulers' teamwork and cooperation make a project of this magnitude look simple and easy. It is anything but that. As the day progresses, the canyon becomes partially barricaded by the masonry holding structure. Work is periodically interrupted by an occasional weather outburst, but even then, the